8 guests. Johnny Carson hated so much they were banned for life. The unforgiving king of late night. For 30 years, Johnny Carson ruled late-night television with that famous smile and seemingly endless charm. America invited him into their living rooms, believing they knew the man behind the desk, the affable Midwesterner who could make anyone feel at ease. But behind that warm exterior lived another Johnny Carson entirely. A man with an unforgiving memory, deep-seated insecurities, and the power to end careers with a single word. Johnny never forgot and never forgave, revealed a former Tonight Show producer who worked with Carson for over 15 years. Cross him once, and you weren't just off that night's show. You were erased from the kingdom completely. Johnny came from Nebraska, but he operated like a Sicilian, noted a longtime friend. He never raised his voice. He never made scenes in public. He simply removed people from his life completely. Given his position in the industry, that removal had consequences far beyond just losing a booking. Most shocking were the seemingly minor transgressions that could land someone on Carson's permanent blacklist. While some guests earned their bans through genuinely outrageous behavior, others found themselves exiled for offenses so subtle that they didn't realize their mistake until it was too late. Tonight, we're revealing the 8 guests who committed Carson's cardinal sins, the stars who found themselves permanently banished from television's most powerful platform, often with devastating consequences for their careers and lives. And while Joan Rivers' betrayal might be the most famous of these career-ending offenses, it was just the beginning of Carson's ruthless approach to those who crossed him. Some of these bans remained in effect for nearly 20 years. Lifted only after Carson's death, made way for new hosts with no loyalty to the king's grudges. But first, let's look at the betrayal that broke Carson's heart and created the most famous feud in television history. A wound so deep that not even death could fully heal it. The betrayals. Number 8. Joan Rivers. The protégé's betrayal that broke Carson's heart. Joan Rivers wasn't just another comedian who appeared on The Tonight Show. She was Johnny Carson's hand-picked protégé, the woman he personally groomed to be the first permanent guest host in the show's history, a position that made her one of the most powerful women in comedy overnight. Johnny didn't just give Joan a platform, he gave her his implicit endorsement, explained a writer who worked with both comics. In an industry where women comedians were still fighting for basic respect, Carson's approval was like being knighted. He made her career. Their professional relationship had evolved into a genuine friendship over the years. Carson advised Rivers on her material, invited her to private dinners, and publicly praised her talent in an era when female comedians were routinely dismissed. For Rivers, Carson became a father figure in an industry where she desperately needed an advocate. Joan used to say that Johnny was the first powerful man in television who didn't ask for something in return for his support. Revealed a longtime friend of Rivers. He championed her purely based on talent, and she was deeply grateful, which is why what happened in 1986 came as such a devastating shock to Carson. The betrayal began quietly. Fox, a fledgling network challenging the Big Three's dominance, approached Rivers with an extraordinary offer. Her own late-night talk show airing directly opposite Carson. The salary was reportedly $10 million per year, an astronomical sum that would make Rivers the highest-paid person in late night. What made the offer particularly tempting was Rivers' growing concern about her future at NBC despite her success. As guest host, network executives had made it clear that when Carson eventually retired, Rivers would not be considered as his replacement. Joan was approaching her 50s in an industry notoriously unkind to aging women, noted a television historian. The Fox offer wasn't just about money. It was about security and ownership of her career. Rivers accepted Fox's offer but faced an excruciating dilemma. How to tell Carson, the man who had made her career and whom she genuinely loved, as a mentor and friend. She was terrified of that conversation, confirmed a producer who worked with Rivers during this period. She kept delaying it, hoping to find the perfect moment, the perfect words. That moment never came. Instead, Fox leaked the news to the press before Rivers could tell Carson personally. He learned about her defection not from her directly, but from a headline in Variety magazine. For a man whose childhood had been marked by emotional abandonment, a distant father, and a mother who withheld approval. This perceived betrayal cut to the core of Carson's deepest insecurities. Johnny went white as a sheet when he saw the headline, recalled a staff member who was present that day. He didn't yell. He didn't throw things. He simply said, "She didn't even call me," and walked into his office. That quiet hurt was more disturbing than any explosion could have been. Carson's response was swift and absolute. He immediately ordered that Rivers' name never be mentioned on The Tonight Show again. All clips featuring her were removed from compilation shows. Guest hosts were instructed never to reference her. It was as if she had never existed in the show's history. "He told me, she's dead to me," revealed Carson's longtime producer, Fred de Cordova. And when Johnny said someone was dead to him, he meant it literally. They ceased to exist in his world. Rivers attempted repeatedly to apologize. She sent letters, called Carson's private number, even sent elaborate gifts to his home. Each attempt was met with the same response: silence. The packages came back marked "Return to Sender," remembered Rivers' assistant. The calls were never returned. It was as if she was screaming into a void. The ban extended far beyond The Tonight Show. Carson's influence meant that Rivers became persona non grata throughout NBC and much of the television industry. Former friends suddenly became unavailable. Invitations dried up. Her career entered a devastating tailspin. Joan always said that losing Johnny's friendship was worse than losing The Tonight Show platform. Noted a close friend. She could survive professionally, but the personal loss haunted her for the rest of her life. The ban remained in effect for the remainder of Carson's tenure and beyond. Rivers did not appear on The Tonight Show again until 2014, 22 years after Carson's retirement and 9 years after his death, when Jimmy Fallon finally invited her back. By then, Rivers had rebuilt her career through sheer determination, but the wound never fully healed. In her final years, she still became emotional when discussing Carson, telling interviewers, "He gave me my career and I hurt him. That pain never goes away."
T-Mobile Arena, had just been built. And so they asked...
Number 7. Wayne Newton, the backstage threat that crossed the line. Wayne Newton had been a frequent target of Carson's monologue jokes throughout the 1970s, particularly regarding his Las Vegas image and what Carson called his suspiciously youthful appearance. The jokes were relatively mild by Tonight Show standards, but they hit a nerve with Newton, who had spent years carefully crafting his public persona. The breaking point came in 1980, when Carson incorporated suggestive jokes about Newton's sexuality into his monologue, implications that were particularly damaging in an era when such insinuations could destroy an entertainer's career, especially one who performed in conservative markets. What happened next became one of the most notorious backstage confrontations in television history. Wayne didn't call. He didn't have his manager complain. He showed up in person, recalled a security guard who was working at NBC's Burbank studios that day, and he wasn't there for a friendly chat. Newton bypassed normal security protocols by using his celebrity status to gain entry to the building, then made his way directly to Carson's office. According to multiple witnesses, he entered without knocking and found Carson reviewing that night's monologue cards. Johnny looked up, surprised but not alarmed. At first remembered Carson's assistant, who was present for the beginning of the confrontation. His expression changed quickly when he realized this. Wasn't a social call, what exactly was said remains somewhat disputed, but Newton himself has confirmed the essence of the exchange in subsequent interviews. By his own admission, he told Carson, "You can make fun of my music, you can make fun of my hair, but if you ever make another joke about my sexuality, I'll kick your ass." For Carson, who had built his career on fearless comedy and never backing down from a joke, this direct physical threat represented an unforgivable line crossed. Johnny stood up very slowly, recalled his assistant. He was significantly taller than Newton, and he used that height advantage. Without raising his voice, he simply said, "Get out of my office before I have you thrown out." The confrontation ended without physical violence, but its repercussions were immediate and permanent. Carson personally instructed his booking team that Newton was never to be invited on The Tonight Show again. a ban that remained in effect for the remainder of Carson's 30-year tenure. Johnny could handle criticism. He could handle angry phone calls. What he couldn't and wouldn't tolerate was physical intimidation, explained a producer who worked closely with Carson. In his mind, Newton had transformed from a joke target to a genuine threat. There was no coming back from that. The ban had real consequences for Newton's career trajectory. While he remained popular in Las Vegas, his national television exposure diminished significantly in the years that followed. Without access to The Tonight Show, then the essential platform for mainstream exposure, Newton's ability to promote new projects to a nationwide audience was severely limited. Being banned by Johnny didn't just mean losing one show, noted a former NBC executive. It meant losing the most important publicity vehicle in American entertainment. For someone like Newton, who was trying to expand beyond his Vegas base, it was devastating. Newton has discussed the ban in subsequent years, expressing no regrets about confronting Carson. In a 2007 interview, he stated, "I would do exactly the same thing today. Some things are worth standing up for, even if there's a price to pay professionally." What makes this ban particularly significant is how it revealed Carson's zero-tolerance policy for anything he perceived as a threat to his physical safety or the controlled environment he created. At The Tonight Show, while he might forgive professional missteps or even personal slights, threatening the man himself was an offense from which there was no recovery.
That was the most humble, just kind of self-effacing entrance I've seen.
Number 6. Charles Grodin. When confrontational comedy crossed the line on paper, Charles Grodin should have been a perfect Tonight Show guest. Intelligent, quick-witted, and capable of the dry, slightly sardonic humor that Carson himself favored. But what began as an entertaining deviation from the standard celebrity interview format gradually evolved into something that deeply unsettled Carson, eventually resulting in one of his most puzzling but definitive bans. Grodin first appeared on The Tonight Show in the mid-1970s, promoting his breakout role in the film The Heartbreak Kid. Unlike most guests, who arrived prepared to tell prearranged amusing anecdotes, Grodin took a different approach. He played an aggressively difficult version of himself, challenging Carson's questions and acting vaguely hostile toward the host. The first time he did it, Johnny was caught off guard, but played along brilliantly, remembered a writer who worked on the show. Carson was a master of improvisation, and he recognized what Grodin was doing, creating uncomfortable comedy through tension. The audience ate it up. The success of that initial appearance led to Grodin being invited back repeatedly, with each visit pushing the confrontational persona further. What had begun as light sparring evolved into increasingly hostile exchanges, with Grodin questioning Carson's interviewing skills, suggesting he hadn't read Grodin's book, and accusing him of not caring about his guests. The problem was, only Johnny and the producers knew for certain it was an act, explained a director who worked on several of Grodin's appearances. To the audience at home, it often looked like a genuinely uncomfortable interview with a difficult guest. The line between performance and reality became dangerously blurred. The breaking point came during a 1990 appearance, when Grodin's act veered into territory that struck too close to Carson's personal insecurities. According to those present, Grodin began mocking Carson's delivery and questioning whether he actually cared about any of his guests or just went through the motions for a paycheck. Johnny's smile got very tight, recalled a camera operator who was working that night. There's a difference between his performance smile and his genuine smile, and anyone who worked with him knew the difference immediately. This was the forced smile that meant he was not amused anymore. What made Grodin's comments particularly cutting was that they touched on Carson's greatest personal vulnerability, his difficulty with emotional intimacy. A man who had been married 4 times and was notoriously distant even with close friends, Carson was sensitive to any suggestion that his on-air warmth was entirely performative. Johnny played along until the segment ended, but the minute they went to commercial, he turned to his producer and said, "We're done with that," revealed a staff member who overheard the exchange. Just those 4 words? Everyone knew exactly what he meant? Grodin was never explicitly told he was banned. He was simply never booked again during Carson's remaining years on the show. When Grodin's publicists would call to suggest him as a guest, they were told politely but firmly that the show was going in a different direction, or that the schedule was full. It wasn't an angry ban like with some other guests, noted a booking coordinator who worked on the show. It was more that Johnny had simply decided that particular comedic dynamic wasn't worth the discomfort it caused him. He had hundreds of potential guests to choose from. Why keep bringing back someone who made him uncomfortable, even if it was just an act? Grodin himself has acknowledged the ban in subsequent interviews, admitting that his confrontational persona might have gone too far. "I thought I was doing Andy Kaufman," he told one interviewer. But Johnny didn't find it funny. The Grodin ban illustrated something important about Carson's boundaries. While he appreciated clever comedy and even gentle ribbing, he had no tolerance for anything that undermined his authority on his own show or questioned the authenticity of the persona he had spent decades crafting. Number 5. Shelley Winters. The drink-throwing incident that ended a career. Shelley Winters was Hollywood royalty, a two-time Oscar winner whose career spanned decades and included classics like A Place in the Sun, The Diary of Anne Frank, and The Poseidon Adventure. Her talent was undeniable, but her unpredictable behavior had become legendary in the industry by the 1970s. Shelley was brilliant but volatile, explained a director who worked with her during this period. She could be utterly charming one moment and explosively angry the next, especially if she'd been drinking, which by that point in her career was increasingly often. Carson had interviewed Winters multiple times over the years with generally positive results. She was a natural storyteller with decades of Hollywood experiences to share, and her larger-than-life personality typically made for entertaining television. But behind the scenes, The Tonight Show staff had begun to worry about her increasingly erratic behavior. She would arrive for pre-interviews seeming perfectly fine, then show up for the actual taping in a completely different state, recalled a talent coordinator who worked on the show. It became a gamble every time we booked her. Which Shelley would we get? The incident that earned Winters her permanent ban occurred during a 1975 appearance that went catastrophically wrong almost from the moment she walked on stage. According to multiple witnesses, Winters seemed disoriented and was noticeably slurring her words as she settled into the guest chair. Johnny tried to guide her gently through the interview, but Shelley kept interrupting, changing subjects mid-sentence, and making comments that didn't quite connect to the questions, remembered a camera operator who was present that night. You could see Carson getting increasingly tense, though he was doing his best to maintain the appearance of a normal conversation. The breaking point came when Carson made what seemed to be an innocuous joke about Winters' weight, a topic she herself had addressed humorously in previous appearances. This time, however, her reaction was dramatically different. "She just snapped," said a stagehand who witnessed the incident. One second she was laughing, or at least appearing to laugh, and the next second she had thrown her entire drink right in Johnny's face, not a splash or a sip, the entire glass of whiskey ice cubes. And all the audience gasped. Carson, drenched and clearly shocked, maintained enough composure to quickly call for a commercial break. But according to those present, his famous self-control vanished the moment the cameras stopped rolling. He stood up, dripping wet, and just walked off the set without saying a word, recalled a producer. His expression was absolutely murderous. "In all my years working with him, I'd never seen him that angry." Carson retreated to his dressing room, changed his suit and tie, and returned to finish the show. A testament to his professionalism, Winters had been quickly escorted out of the building during the break. The aftermath was swift and permanent. Carson personally instructed his booking team that Winters was never to be invited on The Tonight Show again, a ban that remained in effect for the remainder of his 30-year tenure. "It wasn't just about the drink," explained a producer who discussed the incident with Carson afterward. "Johnny felt there was an unspoken contract between host and guest, mutual respect and professional behavior. Shelley had violated that contract in the most public and humiliating way possible." The ban had significant consequences for Winters' later career. The Tonight Show was the essential promotional platform for any actor with a project to promote, and losing access to Carson's couch meant losing visibility with millions of potential viewers. Her film roles were already becoming less frequent due to her age and reputation for difficulty, noted a Hollywood agent familiar with Winter's career. Losing The Tonight Show removed one of her last remaining connections to a mainstream audience. She could still work, but her days of major publicity were effectively over. Winters herself later acknowledged the ban, telling an interviewer in the 1990s that it was probably fair, given her behavior that night. "I was in a bad place then," she admitted. "Johnny had every right to never want to see me again." What made the Winters ban particularly significant was how it illustrated Carson's zero-tolerance policy for any behavior that disrupted the carefully controlled environment he created. At The Tonight Show, while he could forgive flubbed answers or even mild controversies, physical aggression toward the host himself was an unforgivable offense.
Tommy Newsom and tell him he had a great personality.
Number 5. Rich Little. The mysterious disappearance of Carson's frequent guest. For over a decade, impressionist Rich Little was one of Johnny Carson's most frequent and reliable guests, appearing on The Tonight Show more than 30 times between the 1960s and 1970s. His uncanny vocal impressions of celebrities and politicians made him a viewer favorite and seemingly one of Carson's preferred performers. Then, mysteriously, Little simply vanished from The Tonight Show lineup. No public falling out, no on-air incident. He simply stopped appearing, creating one of the most puzzling bans in the show's history. Rich's disappearance from the show wasn't like the other explosive banishments, explained a talent booker who worked on The Tonight Show during this period. There was no single incident you could point to. He just gradually became persona non grata, for reasons that weren't clear to most of the staff. Unlike other band guests, Little's career continued to flourish on other programs and in live performances. He remained a fixture on television throughout the 1980s and beyond, just never again on Carson's Tonight Show. The mystery deepened because Little himself seemed confused by the sudden cold shoulder from a show that had once welcomed him so frequently. "I kept waiting for the call, and it just never came again," Little revealed in a 2010 interview. "Eventually I got the message, but Johnny never told me directly what happened." According to those closest to the situation, the ban stemmed not from any public incident, but from a growing personal dislike that Carson developed for Little behind the scenes. "Johnny found him increasingly annoying off-camera," revealed a producer who worked closely with Carson. Rich had a habit of staying in character, doing impressions constantly, even when the cameras weren't rolling. What audiences found entertaining for 10 minutes, Johnny had to endure for hours during rehearsals and commercial breaks. This tendency to remain on at all times reportedly grated on Carson, who valued authenticity in his personal interactions and grew tired of what he perceived as Little's need for constant attention and approval. Johnny once muttered, "Does he even have his own voice?" After a particularly exhausting pre-show meeting, recalled a writer who overheard the comment, "It wasn't said as a joke. There was real irritation behind it." The final straw appeared to be more substantive than mere annoyance. According to several sources, Carson became convinced that Little was recycling material on the show, bringing back impressions and jokes he had already performed on previous appearances, with only minimal changes. Johnny was obsessive about fresh material, explained a longtime staff member. He had an almost photographic memory for comedy bits and could instantly recognize when someone was repeating themselves. With Rich appearing so frequently, Johnny started noticing patterns and repetitions that viewers at home might miss. For Carson, this perceived laziness was unforgivable. He prided himself on The Tonight Show's quality control and expected guests, especially regular ones, to bring their best and freshest material each time. Rather than confronting Little directly, Carson simply instructed his booking team to stop calling him. When Little's management would reach out to suggest an appearance, they were told the schedule was full, or that the show was going in a different direction. "It was a soft ban rather than an explosive one," noted the talent booker. Johnny never said, "I never want to see him again," like he did with some other performers. He just said, "I think we've seen enough of Rich for a while." That while turned out to be forever. What made the Little situation particularly significant was how it revealed Carson's low tolerance for what he perceived as creative stagnation. While other hosts might have continued booking a reliable crowd pleaser regardless of repetition, Carson demanded evolution and freshness from every performer who graced his stage. Johnny didn't just care about ratings. Observed a former NBC executive, he cared about quality. If he thought someone was coasting on past success or not putting in the effort to create new material, that was almost as unforgivable to him as bad behavior. Little himself finally learned the reason for his banishment years later, when a former Tonight Show staffer explained Carson's frustrations. In subsequent interviews, Little has expressed regret that he wasn't given the opportunity to address Carson's concerns directly. "I could have created all new impressions if I'd known that was the issue."
He said, "I'm as tall as a shotgun and just as noisy. Would you welcome Truman Capote?"
Number 3. Truman Capote. The incoherent appearance that ended in disaster. Truman Capote was one of America's most celebrated writers, the brilliant mind behind Breakfast at Tiffany's and In Cold Blood, whose razor-sharp wit and distinctive voice had made him a talk show favorite throughout the 1960s and early 1970s. But by the time he appeared on The Tonight Show in 1975, Capote was in the midst of a devastating spiral of alcohol and drug addiction that had begun to affect his public appearances. What should have been a typical literary interview quickly devolved into one of the most uncomfortable episodes in the show's history. "You could tell something was wrong the moment he walked out," recalled a stage manager who was present that night. Truman was unsteady on his feet. His speech was slurred, and his eyes couldn't seem to focus. Johnny looked concerned before Capote had even reached the guest chair. Carson, himself no stranger to alcohol, had a strict professional policy about intoxication on his show. While he enjoyed drinking in his private life, and sometimes referenced it in monologue jokes, he expected guests to be coherent and functional during their appearances. Johnny believed viewers invited him into their homes each night, and he took that responsibility seriously, explained a producer who worked on the show. He wouldn't embarrass his audience by showcasing someone who was clearly incapacitated. As the interview began, Capote's condition became painfully obvious. He struggled to complete sentences, occasionally lost his train of thought mid-word, and made several inappropriate comments about other celebrities that couldn't be aired on network television. Johnny tried every interviewing trick in his considerable arsenal. Remembered a director who witnessed the disaster unfold. He asked short, simple questions. He tried to guide Truman toward topics he discussed in pre-interview. He even attempted to turn it into a comedy bit at one point. Nothing worked. The breaking point came when Capote began telling a rambling story about a Hollywood party that veered into explicit territory inappropriate for broadcast standards of the time. Carson quickly interrupted and threw to a commercial break earlier than scheduled. During the break, according to multiple witnesses, Carson confronted Capote directly about his condition. Johnny leaned in and said very quietly, "Truman, you're not well tonight. We're going to cut this short," recalled a stagehand who overheard the exchange. Capote tried to argue that he was fine, but his words were so slurred that they just proved Carson's point. When the show returned from commercial, Carson quickly wrapped up the interview and thanked Capote for appearing. The scheduled 10-minute segment had lasted barely 4 minutes, an almost unprecedented abbreviation in the show's history. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Carson personally instructed his booking team that Capote was never to be invited on The Tonight Show again, a ban that remained in effect for the remainder of his career. Johnny was furious, but not primarily at Truman, explained a producer who spoke with Carson after the show. He was angry at Capote's handlers for allowing him to appear in that condition, and at himself for not recognizing the problem before the cameras started rolling. The ban had significant consequences for Capote's later career. The Tonight Show was the essential promotional platform for authors with new work to discuss, and losing access to Carson's couch meant losing visibility with millions of potential readers. For a writer like Capote, who was already struggling with diminishing productivity, losing The Tonight Show was devastating, noted a literary agent familiar with Capote's career. His last major work, Music for Chameleons, received far less promotion than it would have with a Carson appearance, and sales reflected that. What made the Capote Band particularly significant was how it revealed Carson's standards regarding substance abuse on his program. While he could forgive many transgressions, appearing obviously intoxicated on his show represented a form of disrespect that Carson found unacceptable, both to himself and to his audience. Johnny wasn't judging Truman's personal demons, observed a friend of Carson's. He was protecting his show's integrity. There's a difference between having a few drinks before an appearance and being completely incoherent on national television. Capote's ban served as a warning to other celebrities who might consider using chemical courage before facing Carson's questions. The message was clear: show up impaired, and it would be your last appearance on television's most important stage.
Time.
Right.
We've got a two-parter with probably one of the best shows on television.
Hot Show.
Hot Show, and it's a show that...
Number 2. Smothers Brothers. The political tension that led to exile. Tom and Dick Smothers were more than just comedians. They were cultural lightning rods, whose CBS variety show had become famous and ultimately canceled for its outspoken opposition to the Vietnam War and pointed political satire. Their progressive politics and willingness to challenge authority had made them heroes to the counterculture and controversial figures to the establishment. Carson, who carefully guarded his own political views and preferred to keep The Tonight Show relatively neutral, had a complex relationship with the brothers. He respected their talent and had featured them on his program multiple times during the 1960s, but grew increasingly uncomfortable with their confrontational approach as political divisions in America deepened. Johnny walked a deliberate middle path politically, explained a writer who worked closely with Carson. He would joke about politicians from both parties in his monologue, but he never wanted The Tonight Show to become a platform for divisive political statements. The Smothers Brothers, by contrast, saw their comedy as explicitly political, a fundamental difference in philosophy. The breaking point came during a 1970 appearance that quickly veered from entertainment into political territory. According to those present, Tom Smothers began using his segment to deliver what amounted to an anti-war speech, rather than engaging in the light banter Carson had expected. Johnny's expression changed completely, recalled a camera operator who was working that night. His smile remained in place, but his eyes went cold. He hated being ambushed with agenda-driven content, especially when it departed from what had been discussed in pre-interview. Carson, ever the professional, completed the segment without obvious tension, but according to staff members, he was furious backstage after the show concluded. "Too much trouble for what we get," Carson reportedly told his producer, using a phrase that would become his standard assessment of guests who brought unexpected complications to his carefully structured program. What followed wasn't an explicit, permanent ban like some other celebrities received. Instead, the Smothers Brothers entered what staff came to call Carson Purgatory. They weren't formally banned, but they mysteriously stopped receiving invitations to appear. It was a soft blacklisting, explained a booking coordinator who worked on the show during this period. Their name was never formally removed from potential guest lists, but whenever they were suggested, there was always some reason why that particular week wasn't good. Eventually, their management got the message and stopped calling. This partial ban lasted for years, with the brothers making only rare, sporadic appearances on The Tonight Show compared to their previous regular status. According to Tommy Smothers himself, these infrequent bookings came with strict preconditions about avoiding political material. "We were effectively censored," Tommy Smothers revealed in a 2010 interview. "We could appear occasionally, but only if we stuck to music and non-controversial comedy. The moment we tried to say anything meaningful, the invitations would dry up again." What made the Smothers Brothers' situation particularly significant was how it highlighted Carson's determination to keep The Tonight Show entertainment-focused, rather than politically charged. While other hosts of the era, particularly Dick Cavett, embraced political discussion and controversy, Carson deliberately positioned his program as an escape from such tensions. "Johnny wasn't necessarily disagreeing with the Smothers Brothers' views," noted a former NBC executive. "He was rejecting their attempt to transform his entertainment platform into a political one. He believed viewers came to him for a break from the day's conflicts, not a continuation of them. This philosophy sometimes put Carson at odds with performers who saw their art as inseparable from their politics, a tension that would remain throughout his tenure as television's most powerful host. The Smothers Brothers case revealed Johnny's primary allegiance, observed a television historian. He was committed to entertainment first, not activism or advocacy. Guests who couldn't separate those roles found themselves increasingly unwelcome on his couch.
As you're going to find out in the weeks, months, and years ahead, certain things really burn.
Number 1. Morton Downey Jr., the combative host who pushed too far. Morton Downey Jr. represented everything Johnny Carson was not: loud, confrontational, deliberately provocative, and explicitly political. His syndicated talk show, which gained notoriety in the late 1980s, featured Downey screaming at guests, blowing cigarette smoke in their faces, and whipping studio audiences into near-frenzied states. Where Carson cultivated civility and thoughtful conversation, Downey embraced conflict and chaos. The two men embodied fundamentally opposite approaches to television hosting, a contrast that would become painfully apparent during Downey's disastrous appearance on The Tonight Show. "It was oil and water from the beginning," recalled a producer who worked on the show during this period. Johnny represented old-school class and restraint. Downey was the embodiment of the new shock television that was beginning to emerge. Carson viewed him not just as unpleasant, but as a threat to everything he believed television should be. Downey was booked on The Tonight Show in 1988, at the height of his notoriety. The booking itself was controversial among Carson's staff, with some arguing that giving Downey a platform legitimized a style of broadcasting that was beneath The Tonight Show's standards. Johnny agreed to the booking reluctantly, explained a talent coordinator involved in the decision. He felt that as the leading talk show host, he should at least give this new phenomenon a chance to present himself to a mainstream audience. It was a decision he would quickly regret. From the moment Downey walked on stage, the tension was palpable. Rather than taking his seat in the guest chair as protocol dictated, Downey played to the audience, encouraging their applause and moving around the set as if it were his own show. Johnny's expression was arctic, remembered a camera operator who was present. He had these micro-expressions that the crew could read perfectly after years of working with him. The slight tightening around his eyes, the barely perceptible clench of his jaw. These were warning signs that everyone recognized except Downey himself. As the interview began, Downey immediately attempted to seize control, interrupting Carson's questions and addressing the audience directly, rather than engaging in conversation with his host. When Carson tried to steer the discussion toward Downey's background and the origins of his confrontational style, Downey deflected with increasingly loud and aggressive responses. Johnny tried every interviewing technique in his considerable arsenal, noted a director who witnessed the uncomfortable exchange. He attempted humor, direct questions, even gentle challenges to Downey's approach. Nothing penetrated the persona Downey was determined to maintain. The breaking point came when Downey began criticizing other talk show hosts by name, suggesting they lacked the courage to engage with real issues in the direct way he did. The implicit criticism of Carson himself was unmistakable. Johnny's smile never faltered, but something changed in his eyes, recalled a stagehand who was watching from the wings. He sat back slightly in his chair, a move the crew recognized as Carson disengaging from a guest he decided was not worth his attention. Carson wrapped up the segment earlier than scheduled, thanking Downey with the polite but distant formality he reserved for guests who had disappointed him. According to staff members, he was uncharacteristically blunt backstage after the show concluded. "That's not television. It's a circus act," Carson reportedly told his producer. "And this isn't the big top." While no formal ban was ever announced, Downey was never invited back to The Tonight Show during Carson's remaining years as host. According to those familiar with the booking process, his name was quietly removed from all lists of potential future guests. "It wasn't just that Johnny disliked him personally," explained a former NBC executive. It was that Downey represented a direction in television that Carson found fundamentally destructive. a movement away from conversation toward confrontation, away from wit toward volume. What made the Downey situation particularly significant was how it highlighted the generational shift occurring in television during Carson's final years, emergence of a more aggressive confrontational style that would eventually transform the medium. Johnny was a gentleman hosting in an increasingly ungentle world, observed a television critic who covered both men. Downey was the canary in the coal mine, a warning that the thoughtful, measured approach Carson had perfected was beginning to lose ground to something louder and more divisive. Carson's rejection of Downey was more than a personal dislike. It was a statement about the kind of television he believed in and the standards he fought to maintain until his final broadcast.